What's up, fake footballers? Welcome to the Week 14 Starts and Sits. I'm your host, Greg Smith, at Greg Sauce on Twitter. We're back. It's the first week of the fantasy playoffs for most of us, so I'm sure you're itching to hear about these starts and or sits. Before we get there, let's look at Week 13, see how we did. Quarterbacks are up first. Not a whole lot of great calls here. I mean, some nice ones, but balanced out by the bad ones. Jay Cutler, Ryan Tannehill, Matt Hasselbeck, all really disappointing in what figured to be good matchups. I think in Tannehill's case in particular, I really should have put more stock into the low total that Vegas was projecting for that game. That was a sign that maybe I shouldn't have been as high on Tannehill as I was. It's really hard to trust him, any week at this point, just because even in the good matchups, he's not necessarily going to do well. I think the turmoil with the coaching staff adds to that. Cutler, I mean, what can you say? The Bears just, weren't ready to face the Niners, which is sad, but it happens. Like, those types of letdown games come up pretty frequently in the NFL where, a better team might take a worse team for granted. Matt Hasselbeck injured in the game. That didn't help, I'm sure. But the Steelers defense, we need to give them a little bit more credit. I need to give them a little bit more credit. I thought that they'd have to air it out, the Colts would, against the Steelers. I mean, try as they might, it just wasn't happening. On the flip side, good calls. Fitzpatrick and Alex Smith both finished with about 25 points inside the top 15, or top 12, rather. On the sit side, Drew Brees almost scored 22.5 points, and he finished as QB 14. I ranked him as 20, so I mean, technically he's still, not a starter, not a top 12 guy in a 12-team league. With that said, if you started him last week, you were fine. I mean, 23 points from your QB is good. Tyrod Taylor was even better than that. The Ty God, QB 7, almost 30 points. That was a big whiff. 2 in a row that I missed on him, and I might just go start chasing those points this week. He's got another nice matchup against Philly here in Week 14. Phil Rivers was a nice call, didn't do much. Teddy Bridgewater similarly finished as QB 32. I don't think you need to be told anymore at this point not to start Bridgewater. The Vikings are currently playing. We'll check in again on that game before we get to the Game Flobotic spreadsheet. Last guy to mention here is Brian Hoyer. Finished as QB 13. Twice or half the rank of what I projected him for. 26 in my rankings last week. That was a miss. He scored 23 points. In general, it was a really good week for quarterback scoring. So, even if you missed on some guys, hopefully you didn't go too all in on, guys like Cutler, Tannehill, and Hasselbeck to the point where the other QBs you could have used would have landed you inside of that top 15 where you're getting, 20-plus points. Let's go to running backs. On the start side, I feel pretty good about all these calls across the board. I mean, sure, Kendrick West only finishes running back 41. I had him ranked 14th, 4.4 points. Not great. I mean, he could just as well be, read out as a bad call. But, I think the process there was okay, and he did receive the bulk of the touches. He is the lead back in that offense, and it just so happened that, Spencer Ware got the TD and Kendrick West didn't. That could flip-flop in further games. With that said, Ware is definitely the goal line option and kind of the straight-ahead runner in that backfield. So West will, cede carries to him moving forward. I think I need to kind of equilibrate them in the rankings a little bit, take West down and bring Ware up. David Johnson was a nice call. I think everybody saw that one coming. He finished his RB4 with 18 points. CJ Anderson didn't do great, but he did get hurt in that game. Before he went out, he piled up 5.4 points, which is good enough for RB37. Maybe that was good enough for your team. Probably not. Sean Drone was a nice play and, figures to continue to be a nice play considering the volume he's getting for the 49ers. Jeremy Langford, wasn't stellar. He finished right about where I ranked him. I had him ranked 27th. He finished his RB29. With that said, Kadeem Carey, got in there and kind of vultured a TD from Langford and Matt Forte. So that makes me feel even better about Langford moving forward. I have a feeling Carey's not always going to get those goal line looks. These other guys will be involved too. Amir Abdullah similarly finished pretty well relative to where I ranked him. I had him in 32nd as like a deep league play. He's the Lions running back to own. Joique Bell is, got to be an afterthought at this point. And theoretically, will still be fine in PPR, but Abdullah's the lead guy, and they should keep using him. I like him this week as well. On the sit side, Frank Gore and Antonio Andrews both did pretty well, a lot better than what I expected. They were both bad calls. Otherwise, we did good. Matt Jones, Rashad Jennings, Joique Bell, C.J. Spiller. None of these guys did anything. It'll be interesting to see what Spiller does this week now that Mark Ingram is out. The split between Spiller and Hightower is an interesting, prognostication litmus test for rankers. I'll have Spiller ranked higher, if only because I feel he's the more talented back, and I want the Saints running back who's going to be involved in the passing game. With that said, Hightower, isn't a total scrub in the passing game. He used to, catch his fair share of passes in previous stops. Not a whole lot. I wouldn't call him a receiving back, but he's capable of catching passes in that offense along the same lines as Ingram. I mean, we didn't really expect Ingram to be a receiving option quite as much in that Saints offense, but he really became a PPR monster this year. So it'll be interesting to see how Spiller and Hightower get used. Let's get to wide receivers. There was a lot of bad here on the start side. Moncrief, Bolden, Aiken, Wright. None of these guys did much. Wright, in particular, didn't do anything. I didn't rank him super high. I had him 36th among wide receivers, but 2.8 points, that's not helping you. I hope you didn't start him on that recommendation because that was a bad call. I felt good about where I ranked these other guys relative to the matchup leading into the week. It just turned out that Baltimore didn't really fit the bill of the passing offense that I wanted. Along the same lines as Tannehill, like we talked about earlier. The over-under there was low. I should have, read a little bit more into that. I did not, and it burned me. Bolden and Moncrief are probably calls I would have made otherwise. I really like those matchups. If I saw them again this week, I'd still think that they were pretty good. I mean, we've changed our opinion, or I've changed my opinion on the Pittsburgh defense, so maybe Moncrief wouldn't be as high of a play, but I probably still would have recommended Bolden against Chicago. Maybe considering how I've changed my stance on Pittsburgh as an opponent for wide receivers, maybe I need to do the same for Chicago as opponents for wide receivers based on what happened to Bolden last week. But enough about the bad picks. Let's get to the good ones. Danny Amendola, Devontae Parker, Ted Ginn, all did very well. Ginn in particular, finishes the top 5 wideout with those TDs. On the sit side, Stevie Johnson, Travis Benjamin, both guys got hurt in the game. Didn't really have a chance to do much before they left, so you can't really take credit for those calls, but hopefully if I scared you off of them, that's good. Willie Snead didn't play at all, so he's in the same boat as those first two. And beyond that, we did pretty well. Stephon Diggs, Jamison Crowder did nothing. Terrence Williams and Chris Givens actually did okay in terms of points. I mean, they each scored over 6 points, which for wide receivers is in a normal week fine, but it was a good week for wide receivers. It was a good week for quarterbacks. It was a good week for passing. And so 6 points wasn't what you wanted from those positions. And so hopefully I could scare you off of these guys. Now in deeper leagues, maybe having the wide receiver 42, Chris Givens, would have been okay. But I still think you probably could have done better. And, the signs pointing to these sit calls, I think were valid at the time. Anyway, yeah, good process over results. Let's check in on the tight ends. This is where I definitely did the best in Week 13. Delaney Walker ranked him 3rd among tight ends. He finished as tight end 2. Julius Thomas ranked him 6th. He finished 8th. And Eric Ebron ranked him 14th. He finished 11th. Cameron Brate, didn't do anything, but this was a call before it was official that Austin Seferian-Jenkins was going to play. Once he was noted as being active or, likely to play in that game, that pushed me off of Brate. That's why he's grayed out here. I did, tweet about that a little bit on Sunday. Once we knew that ASJ was going to play, Brate became, a call I didn't want to hold responsibility for. And, he proved me right, tight end 42 with less than 2 points. On the sit side, we did all right. Charles Clay burned us. Finished as tight end 3 with 12.6 points. Jason Witten, Kobe Fleener, Luke Wilson, all under 5 points. Not what you're looking for. Witten's an interesting case this week. I still don't like him with Matt Castle throwing him the ball, but he has a nice matchup against Green Bay. He'll probably be in that 12 to 18 range among tight ends for me this week in the rankings, and that means if he scores a touchdown, you want him. If he doesn't, he'll have another week like this where he scores 4.5 points. Anyway, let's get to the Game Fullbonics spreadsheet. Here we are, Week 14. I've got our links up at the top as usual. Make sure to check out the rankings, of course. Here at the Fake Football. These are what the starts and sits are based on. And I'm not always mentioning all the guys I would start or would sit in a given week on the Game Flowbotics page. So if you have a question, a specific start-sits question between a couple different players at the same position, you can always check out the rankings here. Mine are presented alongside Jeff Brubox and Rich Rebars. All three of us are amazing, great people, and football rankers. So, come get it, check it out. Anyway, let's take a look at what we're dealing with this week. As of this recording, there are about 5 minutes left in Thursday Night Football, Minnesota against Arizona. Carson Palmer's having a great game. He's already hit John Brown for a long touchdown. Adrian Peterson is, still a monster. He has a TD. Teddy Bridgewater's actually been okay. He's got about 100 yards passing so far. Anyway, the only guys I really didn't like here were the Minnesota passing game options: Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph. Not guys I would have started. So far in the game, Jarius Wright's actually been the most targeted Vikings receiver with 3 targets. Diggs has 1. He didn't catch it. Kyle Rudolph has 1. He caught it for 9 yards. Both calls looking fine for now. On the Arizona side, look at this spread, 10.5 points. It started at 7.5, and it got bet so high that, Vegas had to move the line up to 10.5 points on the spread, and a pretty good total here. So you definitely wanted to be in on the Cardinals offense this week. Carson Palmer, Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown, David Johnson. Johnson's having a good game as well, I should note. Anyway, that's it for this game. Let's get to the games that haven't happened yet. Buffalo and Philadelphia. Buffalo small favorites here, 1 point. A nice total, 47. So you kind of got to like both sides of the offenses here. With that said, I'm kind of out on the Eagles. It just seems like they've quit on Chip Kelly, and they definitely had a better showing last week against New England, but a lot of that was just the return game. When it comes to this offense, I have a hard time trusting any individual player. I don't doubt that they'll score some points in this game. They're projected for, 23 points, essentially. And those have got to come from somewhere if they occur, right? So Sam Bradford, while, I have him tabbed as a sit here, he could still throw for 2 TDs. I just would rather look elsewhere at QB and find somebody I trust a little bit more because the basement on him is so low. DeMarco Murray worries me for the same reasons. He just might not get enough carries to be relevant. And the way that Buffalo's offense has played in the past 2 weeks makes me think that there is a chance that, Murray gets game flowed out and that this becomes more of a Sproles and Matthews game for the Eagles where they're passing to the backs more. And just the fact that Matthews is back for this game while Murray has been complaining about playing time, I don't know if that's going to make things better for Murray. Chip Kelly could try to send him even more of a message, keep him on the pine and not give him any carries, and that's a concern for me. Murray will probably still be ranked inside my top 24 among running backs, but with so many other RBs that have come into prominence in recent weeks thanks to injury or whatever else, it's possible you have better options than Murray. So you definitely should, look at your rankings, look at whoever else's rankings you trust. See where Murray slots relative to the other guys on your team. It's very possible that Murray is the guy that you'll want to bench this week. Ertz is the last sit for me on the Eagles. Buffalo, they rank 5th in DVOA against tight ends. They only give up about 44 yards per game. That's, not something you want, especially when Ertz isn't even necessarily the primary receiver. And the fact that the Eagles will also throw to Brent Selleck means that, if they come in around that average of 44 yards per game, Ertz won't even have all 44 of those in all likelihood. On the start side, though, let's get a piece of that Buffalo offense. Tyrod Taylor, I'm sorry I doubted you the past 2 weeks, dude. I'm back in. The Philadelphia pass defense has been awful. Since week 11, they've dropped from 3rd in DVOA passing defense all the way down to the 9th ranking you see here. And because I like Tyrod, I also like Sammy Watkins. He's really turned it on recently now that he's gotten healthy. Let's hope he can, maintain that and stay healthy for the whole season. Charles Clay, he burned me last week, and I hate to, chase the points, but I'm doing it. Philadelphia started the season really strong against tight ends, but they've actually allowed tight ends to score touchdowns in 2 of the past 3 weeks. Again, couple that with kind of their failing pass defense overall, and I like Clay's chances of kind of staying fantasy relevant this week. He won't be inside like my top 5 or 6 tight ends, but he'll be in that 10 to 15 range, and I think that's fine. You can use that. Let's move on to the Niners and the Browns. Cleveland 1.5 point favorites. The low total here, 41. And after all that talk about Dolphins and Ravens last week with the low total, we need to be mindful of getting too excited about any of the offensive options in this game. With that said, for deeper plays, 2-quarterback, maybe 16-team leagues, 20-team leagues, Blaine Gabbert, I'm kind of in. I like him this week. Cleveland is bad. They're just a bad team. They have a bad defense. They rank 28th against the pass. They also rank 29th against the run. So Sean Drone, another guy I like. Overall, Cleveland gives up the second most total fantasy points, like to teams in general. New Orleans is the only team that gives up more. They allow the 5th most points per game to opposing quarterbacks and the 6th most to opposing running backs. So Sean Drone, definitely a top 20 option here, especially with the workload he's been seeing for San Francisco. And Gabbert, if you're in a pinch, if you're in a deep league, he's a guy you can use. I like him. I literally never thought I would say that again after what we saw from him in Jacksonville. But anyway, let's keep going. Detroit and St. Louis. Interesting note on the gambling line here. St. Louis on Tuesday was a 1-point favorite, and this got bet all the way across the pick'em threshold to the point where Detroit is now favored by 2.5. The total here is even lower than in the Cleveland and San Francisco game, 40.5. So don't expect a ton of offense. These are both solid defenses. St. Louis's defense has not been as good lately, and that's why you saw this line shift the way it did. Detroit's defense has been coming on. They're a nice streaming option this week. But in terms of position players, St. Louis still has these numbers that kind of enforce what we saw from them early in the year. They rank 6th against the pass, 8th against the run on defense, but they really haven't played that well recently. We saw it last week with David Johnson kind of tearing them up. With that in mind, I'm going in on the running backs for Detroit. I have Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick as starts. Theo Riddick, a PPR play for sure, but in standard leagues, Abdullah is a guy I'll have inside my top 30, top 24. At the very least, he'll be flex worthy. Kind of along the lines of what we talked about with Philly's pass defense earlier. The St. Louis rush defense, they've fallen in DVOA ranking from 3rd all the way to 8th since week 9, so they're getting worse. And that bodes well for these opposing running backs. Another reason I like these guys is just game flow prognostication. The St. Louis offense has been so bad. I mean, Case Keenum, Nick Foles, it doesn't matter. They're just really, really terrible. It's too bad for Todd Gurley, but it bodes well for Detroit maybe taking a lead and just grinding out the clock, and the low total reinforces that, right? We're going to see a game hopefully where both teams will run the ball a lot. There will be a lot of punting and a lot of field goals, but that type of game script does favor running back production because both teams will be close enough in general to each other as far as the score goes through most of the game to where they won't have to abandon the run, or at least that's the thinking. We'll see if it plays out that way. For Theo Riddick in particular, the Rams allow the 3rd most passes and the 3rd most yardage per game to running backs. They give up 8.5 passes on average to opposing running backs as receivers for 55 yards, 55.1 to be specific. So Riddick is a nice option here if you're in a PPR league and you need to dig a little deeper. As the raindrops start falling here on my house, let's go to New Orleans and Tampa Bay. I hope that sound is not too distracting over the microphone. Anyway, New Orleans, 3.5-point underdogs here. Pretty crazy that Tampa Bay is favored, but Tampa Bay has really come on of late. There's a big total, 50.5 points. So this is, the game where we dogpile on the New Orleans defense one more time. We just take all the passing options for the opposing team. I mean, this is the team that Eli threw, 6 touchdowns against earlier this year. So Jameis Winston, fire him up. Austin Seferian-Jenkins, after, a game to, get his feel back for playing football. He should be, all systems go in this game, we're hoping. So him and Winston are starts. On the other side of the ball, Ben Watson has a nice matchup here. The loss of Mark Ingram, I think, should open up a few more short yardage targets for Watson. They can't all just go to C.J. Spiller and Tim Hightower. I mean, they could, but I have a feeling that Brees is going to stick to the guys he's trusted all season, and Watson is one of those dudes. Moving on, let's get to Tennessee and the Jets. The Jets are big favorites here at home, 7 points, 43-point over-under, so Tennessee's offense not expected to score a whole lot of points. And, of course, the Jets' defense is still pretty stout. They haven't been as good as, maybe perceived or advertised in recent weeks, but they still have the number 1 rushing defense in terms of DVOA. And with that in mind, I once again gotta say Antonio Andrews is a sit. It's not that I hate Andrews. It's just he's had a solid run of bad matchups, and I don't want to be using him when there are other running backs that are probably more appealing that are available to you. Now, if you don't have any of those guys and you have to start Andrews, so be it. He's proven that he can, kind of grind out fantasy relevant days, even in tougher matchups. But he's not a guy I'd be excited about using. On the other hand, I will start Dorial Green-Beckham here. This is mostly a deep league play if you're looking for maybe a guy who can catch a touchdown, a guy with some high ceiling, low floor potential. The big spread for the Jets definitely means that Tennessee should be throwing the ball, especially in the second half. And if that's the case, then I like the dude who towers over everyone else and could potentially catch a touchdown. DGB's that guy for me. If, you're in a deeper league, if you're in a pinch for a wide receiver, he's a guy I think you can use. Steelers and Cincinnati are next. The line moved a little bit. Cincinnati was originally favored by 3. Now they're favored by 2.5. There's a big total here as well, 49.5 points. So basically use everybody. It bodes well for both offenses. You want Roethlisberger. You want Antonio Brown. I mean, none of this is rocket science. These are guys you were probably starting anyway. I do want to highlight Martavis Bryant one more time. I did this a couple weeks ago, basically saying that if you have Bryant, you kind of have to start him every week. And once again, that's the case. He's going to be my wide receiver 7 right now. I don't know if he'll move up or down the rankings a little bit as Sunday approaches. But if you have any qualms about using Martavis Bryant as your number 1 or number 2 wide receiver from here on out, just forget about it. He's great. You have to use him. No other big starts and sits to take away from this game. Like I said, the big total and the high-powered offenses on both sides definitely means that you want to be using the guys that you have in this matchup. Indy and Jacksonville is up next. No line or total on this game, and I think that's only due to whether or not Matt Hasselbeck is going to play for Indianapolis. There's not a whole lot to analyze in terms of that. I would just say that you can't feel good about any of your Colts. Maybe Frank Gore, although Jacksonville's rushing defense is pretty good. They still rank 9th in the league in DVOA at stopping the run. But with that said, if the Colts are going to their third-string quarterback, then Frank Gore is a guy who might just see volume in and of itself, kind of along the lines of Sean Drone with Blaine Gabbert. But on Jacksonville's side of the ball, I do like Blake Bortles. We saw Roethlisberger and the Steelers tear up this Colts defense last week. Bortles is not Ben Roethlisberger, but this is a nice passing attack. They rank 17th in the league, kind of middle of the pack, but they struggle to run the ball. So with that in mind, Bortles has to throw a lot, especially in the red zone. We saw 3 TDs to Allen Robinson last week. He's a no-brainer start. But I also like Allen Hurns coming off injury. He's probable for this game. There is some concern that maybe Julius Thomas will, continue to eat into his production. But I do think Hurns will be involved in this game. It's a nice matchup, and I'd use him if I had him. You very well might have better wide receivers. Check the rankings to be sure if Hurns is a guy you want to be starting, but he's a guy I do like this week regardless. The only other start here, and this might seem counterintuitive to what I just said about the Jags struggling to run, is TJ Yeldon. And, Indianapolis is generally okay against the run. They rank 12th, but they're really banged up front. They got a lot of their defensive linemen are hurt, and that bodes well for this Jacksonville running game. This is all to say that Yeldon, has a better matchup than these DVOA numbers would indicate. And so that's something to keep in mind as you're looking through your lineup decisions for Week 14. San Diego and KC are next. The Chiefs, man, they're playing great. They're huge favorites here, 10 points. It's hard to play in Arrowhead. Even with the 10-point line, the VIG is, still in their favor. More people have bet on Kansas City than San Diego. That's public perception, though. That's not necessarily quote-unquote smart bettors or sharps pushing that VIG all the way. That very well could be, public money, dumb money coming in on the Chiefs based upon, how they've played recently relative to how well San Diego has played recently, which is to say not well at all. With that said, San Diego did face Denver last week, the best defense in the league. This is an easier matchup, but it's not a hell of a lot easier. The Chiefs still rank 5th in overall defensive DVOA, 3rd if you wait for recent performance, so they're good too. And with that in mind, just sit all your Chargers. Phillip Rivers, Danny Woodhead, Melvin Gordon, Malcolm Floyd, Antonio Gates. I would try to find a better option in every case. The running backs in particular, I wouldn't be excited about. I mean, Woodhead is probably startable, and Rivers, while the matchup is poor, is not an awful choice if you're totally desperate. I mean, in a 2 QB league, you might not have a better option, but in a 1 quarterback league, I have a feeling you can find a streamer who's a better option than Rivers. He is questionable with a foot injury as well, and that concerns me. The only other highlight I want to make with these sits is Antonio Gates. He's going up against a Kansas City defense that is the toughest in the league against tight ends. They rank first against tight ends as receivers in terms of DVOA. We've definitely seen Gates be, a matchup beater in the past, but with a hobbled Rivers and Gates himself maybe not 100% against the league's best defense at defending his position, he'll be outside of my top 12. I think he'll be around between 15 and 20 among tight ends for me, and I don't think a whole lot of people would agree with me, but I don't want to use him in this matchup. Let's look at some sunnier outlooks here. Charcandrick West, Spencer Ware, I talked about them in the Week 13 review, but I like this Kansas City rushing attack. They're first in the league in DVOA. The Chargers are 31st in DVOA at defending the run. That's backed up by the defensive line versus offensive line metrics here in adjusted line yards. Kansas City is really good at pushing people around up front. They rank 5th in adjusted line yards, and the Chargers have trouble stopping everybody. So this is a really nice matchup for both backs. I think that both will be fantasy relevant this week. Depending upon how deep your league goes, you may not want to start either one of them, and you might have better options. But, for your standard 12 team, I have a feeling that one of these guys for sure is going to return value, and I actually think that both of them have the opportunity to do so in this matchup. So I like them both. They'll both be inside my top 30 running backs this week. Our next matchup is Washington at Chicago. The Bears are 3-point favorites here, and a lot of money came in on them. They're another public team, so you can't take too much of that as gospel. But the Bears, aside from just a total meltdown last week against San Francisco, have been playing pretty well recently. The total's not great here, 43.5 points. There's not a whole lot I think you take away from this matchup. I think the obvious guys that you would start are still starts. Alshon Jeffrey, Jordan Reed, Matt Forte. I like Langford about as much as I did last week as a deep flex option with the potential to maybe score a touchdown. But overall, none of the guys in Chicago really move the needle for me a whole lot relative to where I would have them ranked normally. It is worth noting that there's a chance of bad weather in this game. It's a ways out still, so forecasts are still pretty dubious, but it looks like it could be windy in Chicago that day with some rain, and that, if the wind gets bad enough, does not bode well for the passing games on either side of the ball, and that's part of the reason why I have Kirk Cousins as a sit. The other half is just that this Chicago defense is pretty respectable now. They rank 13th in DVOA against the pass, and in a pretty small sample size this season, just a handful of games, Kirk Cousins has struggled on the road. They rank pretty well as a passing offense, the Washington does. 13th in DVOA, but, against a pretty decent pass defense on the road with the potential for bad weather, Kirk Cousins isn't a guy I want to use this week. Next up, Atlanta at Carolina. Carolina 9-point favorites. They started off as 7.5 point favorites, so they got bet up even more. Decent total here, 46.5 points. It's the same story with Carolina every week. Their defense is great and their offense is pretty good, but in terms of where they're going to get their touchdowns, the only reliable guy you have is Cam Newton. He's my number 1 QB this week. I think that Carson Palmer, maybe Ben Roethlisberger or Russell Wilson are the only other guys I'd consider, in the same breath as Cam this week. But you got to like him. And I mean, Greg Olson's an every week start. But in terms of his wide receivers, I don't know if you can expect a repeat performance from Ted Ginn Jr. Still, Carolina, everybody's about where you'd expect them to be in the rankings. For Atlanta, though, going up against this defense, I'm not excited. Matt Ryan definitely is sit for me this week relative to other QBs in the rankings. And Jacob Tamme, he's kind of taken over as the de facto number 2 receiver on this team now that Leonard Hankerson is hurt. And this may seem counterintuitive because Carolina's given up a fair amount of fantasy points to tight ends. But if you kind of dig a little deeper into the numbers, the points against numbers, the teams who have really succeeded against Carolina with the tight end have kind of had solid all-around passing games with good wide receivers. We're talking about teams like Indianapolis earlier in the year when Luck was still playing, Green Bay, New Orleans. those types of teams where, the passing threats are all over the field. But when a tight end acts as the number one or the number two receiver, teams that, don't have quite the receiving options, kind of like this Atlanta team, which is basically just Julio Jones and Jacob Tamme, the Carolina Panthers tend to fare pretty well against those types of teams. The exception to that rule was Seattle in Week 6. Jimmy Graham went bonkers in that game. He scored like 14 points. But, if Jimmy Graham's the exception, I'm okay with that. He's kind of an outlier in terms of that position in general. So with all that said, Jacob Tamme is not a guy I'm very interested in this week. I think that there are other, streaming type tight ends that you'd probably rather have. I don't know if I'd outright cut Jacob Tamme. I think they face the Jaguars next week. You might want to hold on to him for that if you're planning ahead. Speaking of Jimmy Graham's team, the Seahawks and the Ravens are up next. Seahawks on the road, 10-point favorites, and this line moved a lot too. On Tuesday, Seattle was only favored by 6, and now this is up to 10, which is kind of crazy. There was no over-under on the game when I checked earlier today, so we can't infer a whole lot in terms of offense from the total, because there is no total, but we know what to expect here. We got Matt Schaub going up against one of the best defenses in the league, and an offense in Seattle that is firing on all cylinders, despite the loss of Jimmy Graham. Call me a point chaser, but I'm going to keep rolling with Doug Baldwin. Since Graham's injury, Baldwin is the number one receiver every week, and this is a great matchup. Baltimore ranks 26th against the pass. I want to remain invested in this guy who is kind of going crazy right now. It's point chasing for sure, but I don't mind. I'm into it. For Baltimore, the one potential bright spot I'm seeing is Javorius Allen, Buck Allen, whatever you want to call him. Seattle's definitely a little more vulnerable on the ground. They rank 10th in rushing defense DVOA versus 4th in passing defense DVOA. The concern in a game like this is that Seattle will get up big and negate the ability for Baltimore to run the ball, but Javorius Allen stays involved in the passing game, so he's a little less dependent on game flow, which is good. If you're in a PPR league especially, he's a guy I like. And as always in a game like this where one team is favored by so much over the other, the underdog team is always incentivized to run the ball more, at least in the beginning of the game, to try and chew up some clock, shorten the game, and not allow the opponent to jump out to a big lead. So with all that said, I do like Allen. He'll be inside my top 20 running backs. Kamar Aiken, on the other hand, he did burn me last week, and I swear this isn't me spiting him. This is just me saying no thank you against the Seattle defense. Seattle ranks first in DVOA against opposing number one wide receivers. Aiken's that guy. You don't want him. Moving on to the afternoon games for Sunday, Oakland at Denver. Denver 7.5-point favorites with a lot of action on Oakland. And Oakland is not necessarily a big public team compared to, a team like Denver. So there's probably some sharp action in there. I don't know how much. It's probably just that the spread is a little too large for an offense in Denver that's, managed by Brock Osweiler. And not to say that Osweiler is bad. He's actually a pretty decent streaming candidate this week if you're looking for something like that. But this line doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of the way this game might be expected to play out, where Denver's going to try to control the ball and let their defense win the game for them, especially playing at home in altitude. And speaking of that Denver defense, I do not like Derek Carr or Amari Cooper this week. This is, kind of a weekly tradition, just like choosing the passing options and running options against the Saints. We pick against the folks that are facing the Denver defense. Denver has the best DVOA against the pass. They're a little easier to run on, so I wouldn't feel too bad about starting Latavius Murray if he's a guy that you have. There aren't a whole lot of RB1 options available in the league overall, so even in a bad matchup, I could understand starting him here. The running back situation for Denver, on the other hand, is a total mess, it seems. Hillman and C.J. Anderson haven't practiced yet this week. It sounds like Juwan Thompson might get some extra playing time. He might even start this game. If he does, and maybe one or both of the other two backs there in Denver are ruled out, you definitely want Juwan Thompson. The Oakland rushing defense is not very good. They rank 22nd against the run in DVOA. So keep that in mind. Watch that situation as it unfolds approaching Sunday. Dallas at Green Bay is our next matchup. Green Bay, big favorites, 7 points at home here against Matt Castle. Not a big surprise. A low total, 42.5 points. This is kind of the typical sort of matchup we're seeing this week. One good team against one bad team, and one where the bad team is not expected to be able to do much. And the Green Bay defense justifies that a little bit. They rank 11th overall in DVOA, only 16th in weighted DVOA though, so they haven't been as good lately. Still, they are facing Matt Castle. If you're looking for a streaming defense and Green Bay is available, they're really very appealing in that regard. Not a whole lot in terms of starts and sits for me in this game. Devontae Adams is the one I will tab as a sit. Dallas actually ranks 9th in DVOA against number 2 wide receivers. Indications are that Green Bay is going to be able to use Randall Cobb a little more actively than they have in previous weeks. Running out of the slot, he should be able to put up good numbers against Dallas. In general, though, Green Bay may not need to pass a whole lot in this game, based on the low total, based on the spread. Dallas is not very good. Matt Castle is prone to mistakes, and that sets up a situation where Green Bay could, take a lead and then just, nurse it with, their total nightmare of a running back committee, Eddie Lacy, James Starks, and John Crockett, John Kuhn, all these guys who you never know who's going to be the lead back any given week. So while I would love to recommend one of them as a start, I'll probably have Lacy ranked the highest. It's too hard to predict which one of the guys is going to be the lead. Lacy and Starks, figures to be one of those two, but I'm not confident either way. Sunday Night Football up next, the Patriots and the Texans. New England only 3-point favorites here on the road, 45-point over-under. A lot of action on the Patriots at -3. The VIG's up to -125 on that line. Kind of makes sense to me. I mean, the Patriots, even though Houston's been playing better defense lately and New England's a little banged up, they're such a good team. They're really well coached. I just don't know if they should be, this small of favorites against a team with Brian Hoyer as the quarterback. Still, Vegas is proven to be smarter than most of us in most weeks, so we'll try not to read too much into it. There is a chance that Gronkowski could play in this game, although the fact that they play on Sunday night is really dubious. I don't know if you can trust that he's going to play. This might just be Patriots mind games and fantasy owner nightmare fuel. Us getting ready for Gronk to play, slotting him in, and then, at the last minute having to say, oh no, he's not playing. What am I going to do? Start Ryan Griffin? Will Tye? And actually, that's no digging against Will Tye. We'll get to him soon. Anyway, this game, who do I not like? Well, LeGarrette Blount, not for me. Houston ranks 24th in DVOA against running backs as receivers. So that'll tend to favor James White and Brandon Bolden more than LeGarrette Blount. This could be a game where the Patriots will go a little pass heavier with the running backs. Blount, is always a threat to score a touchdown or two in short yardage situations around the goal line. But he hasn't played well recently, and the matchup against Houston with receiving backs is exploitable. And I don't think that Belichick will be unaware of that. He's a smart coach. He's going to try to find those matchups to exploit, especially with so many injuries to his other offensive options. Alfred Blue, I'm just out. This is another just nightmare committee. And with the Patriots favored, it's unlikely that Houston's going to win this game in the first place. Chris Polk and Jonathan Grimes, the pass-catching options, the, 2-minute drill options, the guys who aren't going to be in there to kill clock, like Alfred Blue, those are the guys you should probably prefer. I don't think you can start any of them for fantasy for what it's worth, but, if you have Alfred Blue considered as, a running back one or a lead back in an offense, this is not the matchup to be using a guy like him. And lastly, Brandon LaFell. I've never really liked the dude. He proved me wrong once this year, and then since then, 2 bad weeks in a row. The Houston passing defense is pretty solid, 10th in DVOA. Houston's pretty good at getting to the quarterback, too. Their adjusted sack rate is 13th in the league, and that's been trending up over the course of the season as well. New England has had some problems on the offensive line, so it's possible that J.J. Watt and company could be giving Brady a little more pressure to the point where maybe this line is justified and maybe the passing game for New England doesn't start clicking quite as well as some of us might expect or want, and that leaves Brandon LaFell possibly on the outside looking in. I just think you can do better. There are a lot of wide receiving options, and based on his recent performance. I mean, recency bias is bad, but, I never really liked him in the first place, so he's the guy I'm going to recommend against yet again. Last up, Monday Night Football, the Giants heading to Miami. New York are 1.5-point favorites here on the road. 46.5-point total, that's pretty good, especially compared to some of the other games this week. This is probably the matchup I wanted last week's Baltimore-Miami contest to look like. Two bad passing defenses. The only difference is this week the total's pretty good. In that game last week the total was low. Here it's not super high. 46.5 isn't anything to write home about, but again, relative to what we're looking at in other games, we should see some offense here. With that in mind, I'm going back to the well with Ryan Tannehill. New York allows the third most overall fantasy points per game to total teams, and the fourth most to quarterbacks. So sure, Tannehill, why not? I'll use him again. I don't trust it. I don't feel great about the call, but he'll be ranked inside my top 14 among quarterbacks. And since I'm running back Tannehill for the second week in a row, I'll run back Devontae Parker as well. Like I said last week, the talent was always there. All he needed was the opportunity, and now that he has it, the Dolphins have no reason to move away from him and go back to Rashard Matthews or anybody else, really. I mean, Parker's the future of this team. He's going to continue to see targets, and that bodes well in a nice matchup here. Mentioned this guy earlier as kind of a joke, but I do like Will Tye, or I wish I knew if I was pronouncing that right. Anyway, Tye has the number one tight end job all to himself in New York. Larry Donnell was placed on IR with a neck injury, so he's the guy going forward. He's got 70 yards receiving in his past two games, actually averaging more than 6 targets and more than 54 yards per game over his past 4. So they're using him, and while Miami's points against the tight ends doesn't look great, they've faced a lot of teams with little to no threat at tight end. They faced the Jets twice, Baltimore, Houston, and Jacksonville earlier in the season when Julius Thomas wasn't around. So all those games against teams without viable tight end receivers have kind of bring down the points against totals for Miami, and it makes their average points against look not very good. But when you have a team that uses the tight end, those players have fared pretty well against Miami in terms of fantasy points scored. So Will Tye, if you do have Gronkowski and you want to maybe take the chance that he plays, if you can scoop up Will Tye as a backup option, he's a guy you can think about using this week. I like him in this spot. Anyway, that'll wrap things up here in the Week 14 starts and sits. I want to thank you as always for watching and reading if you are into that sort of thing. My name is Greg Smith. You can find my rankings at thefakefootball.com, on fantasypros.com as well. Check out all the other cool stuff on The Fake Football, and hit up all the links at the top of the Gameful Robotics spreadsheet here. A lot of useful content. Go out and crush those playoff matchups. Good luck this week, and hopefully we'll get you that fantasy Super Bowl in a couple more. Take care. Adios.